Good morning. Scott, thank you for that meditation. It was perfect. I think it was last week. Scott came to me and informed me that he'd been tasked with doing the meditation and confessed that he was somewhat baffled by the title of this talk. I would wager that some of you are as well. Fortunately, in the way of all good things, the title of our special music today is perfectly in harmony with what I'm going to talk about this morning. Most of you are aware that I served for 21 years in the United States Air Force, alternating between civil engineering and flying duties. I hold the aeronautical rating of Master Navigator. Most of my 3,500 hours were logged on the C-130 transport aircraft. Very few aircraft carry navigators today because of the development of very sophisticated inertial navigation systems and navigational satellites. The C-130 is a 4-engine turboprop used to haul paratroopers and military cargo for very long distances, and they stay airborne for ungodly amounts of time. It typically moves at 350 miles an hour to from 20 to 30,000 feet in altitude. Much of the flying is out over the ocean, outside the range of radio aids, and the navigator is frequently required to use celestial navigation to get the aircraft to where it's going. Hand flying the ungainly C-130 would be exhausting to the pilots, and so it's equipped with an autopilot. With the aircraft trimmed up and the automatic pilot engaged, the aircraft will continue to fly in the direction to which it is pointed without the assistance of the pilots. With the altitude control switch engaged, it will continue to fly at the altitude at which the control switch is engaged, or at least attempt to. On the aircraft that I crewed, there was an additional switch called Second Station Automatic. That switch transferred control of the aircraft's direction to the navigation table where I sat. I had a knob on my desk, and I could turn that knob to wherever I wanted to go without any help from the pilots at all. Moreover, the aircraft, controlled by the Second Station Automatic, was capable of making much smoother and much more accurate turns than any human pilot could expect to achieve. Both pilot seats could be turned into bunks so that they could rest. And in addition, there were 2 other bunks on the flight deck at which the pilots often occupied, or perhaps an occasional second navigator on very, very long flights. It was not uncommon to go for 10 to 12 hours. Autopilots have gotten even more sophisticated today. It's not uncommon for pilots to use the autopilot not only for flying at altitude, but for takeoff and landing. In fact, our Federal Aviation Agency is beginning to get concerned because the pilots use the autopilot to such a degree that they may have lost their aircraft handling skills. Perhaps someday pilots will go the way that navigators have gone, replaced by an automated system. The autopilot is essentially a stimulus response mechanism. When engaged, it senses when its parameters are out of alignment and sends signals to the aircraft control surfaces to correct the alignment problem. When I turned the direction knob at my station, I created a misalignment, which the autopilot was compelled by design to correct. It did so smoothly and effortlessly. The atmosphere, however, is not always serene and peaceful. Sometimes you get turbulence. When the autopilot gets correction signals in very rapid succession, it tends to shake the airframe up a little, and you'll hear the pilot say, "It's time to fasten your seatbelts," and you know it's going to be a bumpy ride. In a severe downdraft, the autopilot senses the change in altitude and raises the nose of the aircraft in order to regain the original altitude. Sometimes the downdraft is so severe and the nose of the aircraft is raised so high that the aircraft will actually stall out and fall. And if you're close to the ground when that happens, it can spoil your whole day. I recall once on a low-level mission in a two-engine Convair being caught in what is called the Foehlenwald effect. And that's where the wind flowing over the backside of a mountain creates a very severe downdraft. And of course, it takes the aircraft with it. And on this particular mission, I was sitting on the jump seat between the two pilots. And they were busy discussing a football game that they had seen on television. The aircraft started going down, the nose started coming up, and they were still talking about that football game. And I could not resist moving the throttles forward with my boot. And I felt the pilot's hand closing over my boot toe as he advanced the throttles, added power, and let me know that he knew what was going on. I mentioned this point to make the point, this incident to make the point that autopilots, as wonderful as they are, have to be monitored. Sometimes you have to add power to avoid stalling out, and sometimes you have to change direction to get where you're going. Why am I bothering to tell you about autopilots? Remember that I mentioned that the autopilot is a stimulus response mechanism. Guess what? So is the universe. You may not have occasion to sit in an aircrew seat and manipulate the controls of an autopilot, but you can't get out of operating in the stimulus response system which the universe is. The design of the autopilot is intricate. So is that of the universe. The autopilot is impersonal, willing to follow any direction that you input into it. So is the universe. The autopilot does not hold you responsible for erroneous signals that you send to it. It goes where you direct it to go and does what you direct it to do. So does the universe. The design and engineering of the autopilot is what it is when you're flying with it. You can't change the design of the universe either while you're living in it. The universal second station switch is engaged for each and every one of us. Each one of us has the ability to change direction in our lives if it's not going in the direction that we desire. However, it doesn't work for us unless we turn the knob to change direction. When you do make a change, the universe, by design, is compelled to react and place you on the new heading toward the goal you wish to achieve. Like the autopilot, it does not determine if you are worthy to take the new heading. It doesn't care what your destination is. You should make sure that the altitude control switch is engaged. Aircraft have been known to fly into high terrain or into the ocean itself, perfectly controlled by the autopilot, whose altitude control switch was not engaged and whose crew was not paying attention. The universe's altitude control switch maintains the level of your consciousness. It's lubricated by meditation and prayer. The switch is built into every human being, but only you can activate it and only you can monitor it. You have to stay awake to do that. Staying awake is very important. I confess that I have not always stayed awake. I will tell you this story on myself, confident that I can no longer be punished for it, and assured that none of you know anybody that you could report it to. Our crew had departed our base in Germany about 8 o'clock in the morning, bound for the Azores in the Atlantic Ocean. Over France, we were contacted by our control center, command and control, and informed that the crosswinds in the Azores were out of limits for our particular kind of aircraft, and we were directed to land in Mildenhall, England, and go into crew rest. We had only been airborne an hour, and no one was sleepy, no one was tired. Military Airlift Command didn't give a rat's ass about that. They didn't care. Rules are rules and have to be followed. We knew full well that 10 hours after we touched down at Mildenhall, we were going to be alerted, ordered a flight plan, and proceed to the Azores. Our aircraft commander on that particular mission was a real party animal, and he suggested that we all catch a train and go to London. I declined, as I had an old friend at Alconbury Air Base, an American air base in the UK, and I hadn't seen him in a long time, and I wanted to make contact with him. My friend and his wife drove down to Mildenhall to take me to dinner. I took a nap prior to their arrival. It took them some time to get there. I tried to sleep after dinner, but I couldn't because the crew hadn't showed back up, and it was getting close to alert time. I began trying to think of a good story to tell to the Airlift Command duty officer as to why we couldn't launch on schedule, fully aware that the delay would be reported all the way to Military Airlift Command headquarters. About 5 minutes before the telephone rang, the crew walked in, and the aircraft commander decided to launch. No one had slept a wink. As we were climbing out over England, the aircraft commander engaged the autopilot, climbed into one of the bunks, and directed me to wake him in about 5 hours to land in the Azores. I got the aircraft pointed in the right direction, obtained a fix, and reported our position to Crowton Airways, which was our control agency. We were required to report at least once an hour. I had not slept all that well myself, so I asked the co-pilot, who was the only other person awake on the airplane, to wake me in about 30 minutes, and I would get a fix and make a position report. I set a 600 nautical mile reading in the Doppler computer. That's about 2 hours flying time in a 130. And that particular computer makes an oddball sound when it counts down from 000 to 999. And I heard my subconscious detected that sound, and I came instantly awake. There was some confusion because I knew that I had set 2 hours worth of mileage in that computer. So I looked up at the co-pilot's seat and found him sound asleep, as he had been for at least an hour and a half. I got a quick fix, reported our position to Crowton Airways. They had already begun a radio search because we were way out of limits in terms of reporting. They thought we might have gone down. I pretended radio difficulties as to why we had not checked in on schedule. And you can be sure that I did not report that we'd all been asleep for quite some time. The autopilot saved our ass and did not judge us for our lapse of attention. It did just what it was supposed to do. That incident taught me to trust autopilots. We can learn to trust the universe too. We are more guarded and guided than we realize. Could it be any different for a creative force that even notes the fall of a sparrow. And Jesus reminds us that we are worth many sparrows. Remember that I mentioned that the autopilot is impersonal? Well, one of the questions that continually resurfaces in religious studies is this one. Does God answer prayer? What they're really asking is, does God personally answer prayer? In that regard, I have both good news and bad. The bad news is that no, God does not personally answer prayer. It may help you to think of it that way, but it doesn't change the reality. God is not a prayer censor saying yes to this one and no to that one. The good news is that God has created a system that automatically answers prayer. The system is well staffed with angels and spirit guides who know what our destiny is and have a signed copy of the agreement that we made when we incarnated here as to the lessons we're supposed to learn. If we are willing. Are all prayers answered positively? Thank God, no. I shudder to think what would have happened if I had gotten a positive answer to everything that I had ever prayed for. The truth is that we're praying all the time, whether we realize it or not. Your expectations are very influential in what you realize. Some of you are old enough to remember the comic Flip Wilson. He would dress in drag and portray his favorite character, Ernestine. In drag, he closely resembled a lady of the evening on the Las Vegas Strip. The line which will be forever associated with that character is this one: what you see is what you get. There's a great deal of metaphysical truth in that declaration. Yeshua tells us in the Magian Gospel of Brother Yeshua, in its simplest form, prayer is companionship and cooperation with God. Our whole lives are intended to be prayers. We become a product of those thoughts to which we give our time, attention, and emotion. The Apostle Paul said very meaningfully, whatever's true, whatever's honorable, whatever's just, whatever's pure, whatever is lovely, whatever is gracious, if there is any excellence, if there is anything worthy of praise, think about these things. And Yeshua responds, exactly, and so we grow. He goes on to say, this is a universe in which an ideal, will by expectant mind, becomes event. The universe produces the desired result as if by a stimulus response mechanism. Thinking and willing call the desired object into existence. In speaking of his own coming, Yeshua says, God did not send me. Man's need and generations of wistful hope created a concept of the Messiah and of Christ. The Jews' needs and their passionately pictured desires incarnated me in their midst to demonstrate the ideal. I was prayed out of the universe to earth by the needs and desires of men, not forced upon the earth at the capricious will of God. And yet, in the most profound sense, my coming was the will of God, because his universe is so conceived and constructed that mind can get whatever it sincerely desires. Wow, folks, wrap your mind around that concept. Because his universe is so conceived and constructed that mind can get whatever it sincerely desires. The God that you are praying to is not in some far-off place, but residing within your very own consciousness. As the autopilot responds to signals that you send it via your second station automatic, so too does the universe respond to your prayers. Every thought you think with feeling is a prayer. The stronger the input signal, the more effective the response. Passionate prayers and corporate prayers are responded to much more quickly and effectively. The woman who reached for the hem of Jesus' robe to heal her medical condition made a very powerful input. The universe was compelled to respond, and Jesus felt the power flowing through him. In the Magian Gospel of Brother Yeshua, we find this caution. Don't pray unless you mean it. Be careful of what you pray for, as you will likely receive it. And don't mouth idle wishes such as, I wish I was dead, or I wish you were dead. You may hurt yourself or others inadvertently, almost playfully. Remember that the autopilot is non-judgmental. It presumes that you wish to go where you're directing it. Consciousness is inherent in all things, however dense or diaphanous, and all consciousness at all levels is linked directly with the spirit and mind of God. All his energies, both spiritual and psychic, are endlessly available to each creature, limited only by the evolving nature of its understanding. When I compare the autopilot to the universe, do not think that there is only one autopilot. We each have our own. Our autopilot is within us as God is within us. We can choose to ignore it if we wish. We can even choose not to turn it on. But flying or living is so much easier if you do turn it on and use it. You have chosen to make your home in Harmony Fellowship of Fort Worth, so I know that your second station automatic has been engaged. You're the ones determining the directions you will take. Make sure you pay attention to the altitude control switch, which is your consciousness. Considering what's going on in the world today, you may need to fasten your seatbelt. It could be a very bumpy ride. Don't worry, Yeshua in the Magian Gospel proposes a simple creed for those who insist on creeds. One of the lines reads, I believe in life as a presenter of problems and the opportunity to learn. If you sense yourself stalling out, don't forget to add power in the form of prayer. Your purpose on this flight we call life is to get where you're going. The destination is the same for everyone, namely at home in the heart of God. In truth, you're already there, but you may not yet realize it. Maintain your autopilot with meditation and prayer. Turn your second station switch to the correct direction. Stay awake.